Well, hello everybody. Welcome to the UCLA Drive Time podcast. This is a live edition. It is February 11th, and we are this is an ongoing experiment. We're learning how to do these live, and I hope this is a tiny acorn that's going to grow into a mighty oak, because we have just a tremendous amount of incredible stories that we want to share, and we want to give you a first-person insider's look at what is it to make a six-figure investment in my career through graduate school. And if you are already in the program, or if you're newly admitted to the program, I want to introduce you to people in your network. If you're future members, then this could be your network. But if you're already an alum or a current student, Wing Lee, that you're going to meet today, is an incredible example of the caliber of people that you are now a part of as an alum or a current student in the UCLA Anderson Universe and Network. So with no further ado, let me tell you some things about today's featured guest. Wing Lee, 2023, is in her second year of the program. Today's session is titled How to Anderson. And it's, I think, How to Anderson, because Wing is a very active student leader here with a great inside point of view on, how do you do this, how you do this during COVID, after COVID, looking forward, all that. But she's also, in my observation as a professional talent scout, she's also a how-to in managing a career. And from being born in Hong Kong, raised in Orange County, she went to our rival across town, USC, where she earned a BS in Business Administration. And because we believe in diversity at UCLA, we're going to throw a little love at USC to show how diverse we are, how inclusive we can be. I have honestly had the honor of admitting some incredible graduates of the USC Marshall undergraduate program. One of our student body presidents was a USC Marshall undergrad. So we do have mad respect for what you guys do over there in your undergraduate program. Of course, for grad school, you should come to Anderson. But for undergrad, wonderful feeder for Anderson. And so Wing graduated from that program. At USC, she earned awards like the Order of Troy, the Marshall Lifetime Achievement Award, the Tommy's Peer Achievement Award. She did multiple internships as a BS in Business Administration major there, and launched her career even before she graduated with high quality internships. And she has segued those into a really great first almost decade of her career. And she'll go into more detail, but just to name the four blue chips she's already worked for and is currently working for: Kraft Heinz, GoPro, Mattel, all the way to her new role at Disney, where she's been about almost 4 years. Is that right?
Yep.
With a brand new role, 6 months old, as Revenue Management and Analytics Manager, which is a new promotion, which she earned during FEMBA, which is music to my ears. And then lastly, she's an active student leader. She is our FEMBAssador co-president. You met Will Lysette 3 episodes back. She and Will lead the FEMBAssadors. So those of you who are new admits or are prospective students, you may have already met Wing at some of the virtual events we've been running. And in parallel to that, on FEMBA Council, the student government for the overall student body, she is active on the executive board, where she is the VP of External. And then, fun fact, she's also engaged, and she's 2 months away from getting married in Hawaii. So if you ain't jealous of her for all these other reasons, you could just know that she's really, really making great stuff happen in her career. So it's my pleasure to welcome all of you, and to really set the stage for a person I think you can learn a lot from, about Anderson, but also even just about dancing through the first decade of one's career powerfully and effectively. And I love her story, because she's got some of those networking nodes that she gets to share about that I hope can inspire us all. So with no further ado, I will hand it forward to Wing Lee, our guest today.
Thanks so much, Dylan, for that wonderful introduction. I feel like I need you to introduce me like on all my meetings or something. So, hey, everyone, thanks for joining. I'm super informal. So as you have questions that come up, like, feel free to pop them in the chat. I have that open. Really anything, if you want to jump in and just make a comment, that's totally cool too. But I'll kind of dive in to also leave time for questions. So for me, some background fun facts. I mentioned this USC. I always get that question of like, oh, you chose UCLA. Why? I'll get into that a little bit more. But I was born in Hong Kong. I grew up in Southern California. So that's my hometown here. And I did marching band for a little bit in high school, but I am a first gen student. So meaning my parents didn't go to college. So going to USC and then eventually now pursuing my MBA was really a big milestone for my family, for myself. So for me, getting this degree is not just for me, it's really for myself and all the people who will come after me, like my kids. So part of what I love doing as part of my career is really mentorship and staying active, both physically, but also staying active in the community. And so I'll dive into that a little bit more. And that kind of leads me into why I'm so involved in Anderson and how you could be too. So my post-grad career and pre-Anderson career. So I started my career at Kraft, mainly in the sales and account management. So that's kind of where I built my career starting. Great experience. Kraft Heinz became Kraft Heinz when Heinz acquired Kraft. I was probably there for about 3 years. And I worked with so many brands. And that was one of the things I really enjoyed doing because like Dylan mentioned, as you go through your internships in your undergrad, and then as you start your career, you kind of figure out what you like and don't like, because that is just as important as finding like what you're passionate about. So for me, my passion at first, I was like, food. Yeah, I love food. Why? I'll sell food anywhere. So I called on Safeway Albertsons, mainly focused on the craft side. And then Heinz came aboard. So that kind of merged. Culture was also very important, right, as part of my career. And one of the big things that kind of led me out of Kraft Heinz was the culture. There was a huge culture shift when Heinz acquired Kraft. And for me, I was like, I wanted to be at a place where I enjoyed working, where they treated me like a person who wanted to develop me and not just a number. And I've seen that as working in a lot of different companies, you get a lot of different experiences. So that was kind of a big pivotal moment in my career where I had to really decide, well, what do I want to do with my life next? And what do I want to learn? Going through a merger is one of those moments. So for me, sales and account management, I loved it. I loved what it taught me, but I didn't really necessarily want to do it forever. And so that led me to my next move, which was building on top of my experience. I moved into sales operations and analytics at GoPro. And what I did was I helped manage both the domestic business as well as the international business. So that gave me that scope because I really wanted to get, well, what is it like working for a truly international company? And GoPro is one of those brands. I was able to support the APAC regions. So that included Hong Kong, China, but also like Australia, New Zealand. So I got to work with a lot of teams across the world, understanding what drives their business at all of those places. Fun fact, Australia, New Zealand, the sales over there for water-based accessories for cameras, because they surf and all the water sports, like tremendously exceeded any other part of the world. And that's something like you don't really understand if you were just outside looking in, but being part of the day-to-day, understanding what conversations, those were, that really opened my eyes of like, well, analytics and insights is a lot about like why consumers do things. And again, that built on me, love working for brands that I can relate to. And that kind of really took form into like, well, what is my North Star as I kind of navigated my career? With that, my next move was moving actually back to Northern California. So these two roles were actually up in San Francisco. That brought me to build again on top of my career of transitioning into more of a global business insights and analytics. So, having the GoPro experience was like, here's that global piece. I'm like, I like that global piece. I like working for a company that had that brand recognition globally. Mattel is another one of those companies. I worked on a number of these brands, and really the global business insights team at Mattel was the internal consulting arm. So I worked with the brand teams, worked a lot with our pricing team to really understand, well, how do these brands play in the market against all the other toy brands? And this was a new market for me because, growing up, I played with toys, but I never really look at it this way. But we're back to, these are other brands that I also relate to and can, help sell and market that story of like, what is that story? Where is this going to go? Toy industry, when I was at Mattel, this is when Toys R Us went bankrupt. And so that was a huge customer for us, right? So we had the Amazon, Walmart channels, Target, but Toys R Us was a big account. Another big transition, I feel like. And for me, I was here at Mattel for a year. The toy industry is relatively slow moving, mainly because in merchandise in general, right? You have that 18-month lead time to create products. If you think about Hot Wheels, they have to create these molds to then make these Hot Wheels toys to then go through licensing and partnerships to understand, well, what are we going to make? So the fast but slow paced nature of the industry didn't really keep me learning as much as I wanted to. So luckily, on the drive to Mattel one day at work, Disney actually called me back. I had interviewed with them a couple times, and they still had my resume on file. I interviewed for the role and took it, and it was actually building on top of what I had done before, but also I hadn't done before. So I moved into a corporate finance role at Disney. Corporate finance is actually a lot of analytics and numbers. And so a lot of what I did, I found in and across industries, people have different names for similar roles. And so I think it's really the storytelling of like, where does all of this connect? And for me, I've gotten really good at connecting dots for people, because when you're interviewing for a role, you have to tell them why my unique background actually makes sense for them. And then when it clicks for them, then they hire you. So I eventually ended at Disney 4 years ago now, started at corporate finance. So I actually support Disneyland Resort based out in Orange County. So I love my job because my office is right behind Toontown. And so the perks of the culture was there, right? I got to do coffee walks like in the park, like come in, walk down Main Street, get a coffee, go back to the office. But it was also like all exciting things that I loved. Again, I go back to, this was a brand I enjoyed living and going to and consuming in my everyday life. And of course, in a different industry, entertainment. But that again built on, well, what's my North Star? And that is really being able to relate to the brands and partake in them. And that's really what's driven my career. And then, as Dylan mentioned, since Anderson, I've gotten a promotion. I'm now in the revenue management analytics strategy portion of Disney, still supporting Disneyland Resort. So I've taken kind of what I've built and what I've learned in the 3 years I was in the finance role to really build on to what I'm doing now. I love it. So something I'm actually hiring for a senior analyst if you or any of your friends are interested. But what I do now is really focused on not the cost side, but the strategy side, right? So, and I think it bodes well of like, well, this is what I'm learning in my MBA, right? All the classes, all the lessons I'm taking is how do I take all the different components of a business, but think about that strategically of how are we driving the commercial value of what we're bringing to Disneyland Resort. So a lot of what I'm doing is high level analytics, but I needed all the things below that, right? To really understand and get that full picture. Because now I understand the financial impact without having to ask the finance team necessarily. I know that. So I have almost like a shortcut to communicate with all of these different parties and all of these different teams. So that's been my journey so far. And I want to dive into kind of what's so unique about Anderson, because that's one of the things where you're like, well, okay, well, maybe you're deciding between programs. Maybe you decided already. But for me, when I was deciding, it was really between USC and UCLA. And these are the three things that stood out to me. The student and alumni network and the connections. So when I was interviewing and going through the application process, this was a distinction where UCLA Anderson had so many students I could tap into. They had the FEMBAssadors, they had this community that treated me like part of the community before I was even accepted. I was like going to events, I was going to coffee chats, and they were talking to me like I was a peer already. Like the things that you can do here is amazing. USC had a little bit of that, right? And I expected more because I was a USC undergrad. And so going through the business school, I was like, okay, this is what I got when I was an undergrad. Like, am I going to get the same or better for this graduate program? I I went to class visits and I felt, the difference in almost like the caliber of questions asked. Like I wanted the class visit at USC to be very different than an undergrad class that I attended at USC. At UCLA, it was great discussion, great professors, great lectures. And so that kind of separated UCLA Anderson from USC for me. Another piece of that were the global opportunities, which I'll also touch on a little later, but UCLA had what I was looking for. And what I was looking for was I didn't get to study abroad or get to travel internationally during my undergrad. And I wanted that for my graduate program. UCLA had so many more touch points where you could apply and go places. Like I've had classmates that just this past quarter, right, they went to like Dubai and like all these other places. I'm like, that's great. Like there's that opportunity, even with, the pandemic happening, like this, evaluating the situation. And lastly, the leadership and extracurricular opportunities. I think for me, I was super involved in undergrad. I feel like that's just like what I do. And so with Anderson, there were still so many opportunities to be involved. And I even got a glimpse of that before I was accepted, before I was admitted, because Anderson does such a great job highlighting the communities that they have and the resources they had. And so I'll kind of dive into that because part of going to Anderson is really expanding your professional toolkit. And Dylan mentioned this, right? You're climbing a career ladder. That's what you're doing. But what you're also doing is building your brand. And that's really what's important because when you come out of Anderson and even during Anderson and even during your career, you're morphing and shaping this brand that other people, even external to your company, you want them to know about you, right? And so I think Anderson is a great way to do that because you can treat Anderson as your sandbox. And I say that because it's such a safe space to do anything you could have wanted to do, but may not have had the chance to do. Anderson has this on their website, being a part-time program with full-time resources. And I can't say this enough because Anderson does treat you like a full-time student and provide you with those resources where other programs may not. And some of this is really that UCLA advantage. There's the classroom experience, which I've thoroughly enjoyed, despite majority of it being remote. But the network, like the people, will make that effort to like meet people, whether virtually or get coffee or all of the above, or in happy hours, etc. So it goes back to the club experience, right? You have those resources, you have that connection to alum, but it's that social immersion, that network. It's all about meeting all these different people who are working maybe in different industries than yours, but maybe working in industries that you want to get into. And it goes back to career advancement, the global access. There's so many resources. Diving in to maybe you're here to accelerate or pivot your career, right? On-campus recruiting, FEMBA career certificates is a great opportunity. There's a sample of like all the companies, right, that UCLA Anderson hires into, the clubs and centers that we have, the network. And some of the resources we have are career coaches, which we have an awesome FEMBA career services team. They have amazing backgrounds in a lot of different industries. And you can literally talk to them about anything. Is it interviewing? Is it, hey, I'm trying to pivot, or how do I don't know, write this networking email? Anything trivial to things that you want to say, like, how do I negotiate for my salary? They can help you with that. There's also alumni in residence and executives in residence, which are basically people who are already in the industry. And this is really great for people who are trying to pivot, because if you might not know anything about the industry, these are people to go to. And of course, we have amazing faculty and staff, because the electives and the connections that they have are great. I will even say, like for me, I've taken a few electives where professors have brought in guest speakers. And the guest speakers are people who founded their companies, who have, been in companies that have disrupted their industries. Bouquets, like the flowers business, their founder has come to speak, and how did they come up with this idea, and they totally disrupted the floral industry, right? I'll give some more examples later, but it's phenomenal, the connections that our professors have, that I think, despite reading case studies and all that stuff, I think the most valuable is being able to hear these people's stories and their experiences. and then getting to ask them questions. Um, a sampling of UCLA Anderson clubs, right? There's so many that they're not all pictured here, but I say that there's so many resources when it comes to, do you want to, right, have an industry specific professional club that you want to be involved in? So many resources, but there's also a lot of fun ones, right? For if you want to expand your network, be social, find people who have similar interests, like with you. So many things. Some samplings of what I've been involved with. So my first year, I took leadership positions in FEMBA Council, FEMBAssadors, and Entertainment Management Association. For me, I started at Disney when I started FEMBA, and I intend to stay at Disney. So the Entertainment Management Association just made sense. This past year, so when I started my second year, I actually moved into board positions, and now like the VP of External Affairs for FEMBA Council, which I mainly in charge of kind of the career services OCR aspect of it. FEMBAssadors is probably how you've all met me before, but really being an advocate for the Anderson program because it's such a good resource. And EMA, and I particularly joined the alumni relations team because, again, I feel like my goal of being at Anderson was to build my network. And EMA has amazing connections across entertainment. So that's a little bit about the clubs. I'm going to take a little pivot to maybe you want to take on entrepreneurship. And I'll preface this by saying when I applied, I was like, I'm 100% doing GAP, which is the Global Access Program, which is the capstone project for consulting with a global company and seeing if they want to enter the United States and building a whole business plan. But then I found out, oh, there's also BCO. I was like, well, I don't want to start a company. That's my mentality when I joined Anderson. And then I started talking to students and then talking to students who've done BCO. And they're like, when would you ever start a company? Like, if you had not gone to Anderson, if you not had met people who also wanted to start a company, would you ever start a company? I'm like, yeah, I don't know. I'm like very risk averse, but maybe I do want to down the road. Who knows? Because I may want to be my own boss one day. And so I actually started taking, there's 2 classes so far, right? So last summer I took EDI, which is Entrepreneurship Venture Initiation. And that's really like the onboarding of like, here's what it means to do market research, to understand what the addressable market is, to understand what your competitor is doing. And is there a demand for it? Is there an appetite for whatever you want to create? That was an amazing class. My professor was the co-founder of Tinder, and he had amazing stories of like all what he's done. And so that kind of piqued my interest. And I mean, we ran with a business idea that we've taken to our second class, which is called business plan development. A lot of the work we've done in the first class kind of lends itself to the second class. So it's a little less work for us this quarter, but it is how do we kind of make this happen now? Like, how do we make this? How do we LLC, launch it, understand customer research, MVP, what's a minimal viable prototype, right? Product of doing that. BCO, 51% of BCO projects have launched post-grad, right? A lot of people will just kind of do it. And then after graduation, they're like, yeah, I'm good. But at least they say they've done it. And I think that's one of the things that I want to do, because I would have never done this outside of Anderson. I would have never thought of starting a business. Actually, I kind of thought about it, but not actually done it. So my point here is that the sandbox, right? Trying something that you may not have done. Another big resource that Anderson has is actually the Venture Accelerator. We have a classmate who's doing this now because she has her own company. But there's so many cool companies that pitch and have company presentations. And there's 2 companies that have been purchased. One was K-pop Foods, who just got bought. And they do like Korean sauce condiments, but amazing. And it's amazing to see these people's stories. You can actually go to the UCLA Anderson page, the Venture Accelerator, and you can see a whole list of all their company presentations. What does a pitch deck look like? Like, how do they pitch their story? What is their story? So I think this is one of the really unique things that we have that's been so amazing. So
just to give you, because you are so information rich, just to give you a second to catch your breath, but because Tori Brodsky is one of Wing's classmates, and she's also a successful participant in the Venture Accelerator, the business creation option, and we're just watching her. Her company's called Drink Light, and it's like the morning after Saturday night. It's rehydration for the active social life. It's really, really cool. And she won the Wolfen Award, so she actually received scholarship and funding and support. And one of the amazing things, just to say something special also about Wing, Wing is also part of the generation that started in the fall of 2020.
Yeah.
Who did an entire first year virtually because of the constraints of COVID, and yet they're still creating these incredible outcomes. And I'll give you the floor back in 1 second, but I love to say that entrepreneurship is in the water at UCLA. I've written 2 books in my 2 decades working here because I always wanted to be a writer, but I never got around to it. And it's like, well, if everybody else is doing all this stuff, maybe I can also. So if you've got that little wisp of a dream, like, no, I just want to get a promotion and I want to go from, individual contributor to manager or manager director. Maybe you think you are a company person and you like the security, the comfort, the predictability, but there's a way of thinking that's so, like, entrepreneurship is not as scary as it might seem. Once you pull the curtain back with trusted guides who've been there and done that, and these curricula really do walk you through. And it's amazing watching people leave Anderson as entrepreneurs who weren't even thinking about it, let alone the people who were already, prototypical engineers, entrepreneurs coming in the door. So, all right, back to you, Wing, because you were this is the best. I love your pitch. It's so awesome. Okay, keep going.
Sorry,
Go ahead, Jay.
sorry, can I interrupt with a really quick question since you
Yeah,
said
of
that's
course.
okay? So I'm really excited about your enthusiasm, both you, Wing, and Dylan. I wonder how often that happens, right? That people. So I've heard you say this, Wing, for the second time now, but that people come in and they're like, "I'm not an entrepreneur," and they come in and, as Dylan says, entrepreneurship's in the water, and then how many people come in and say, "Okay, maybe this is something I can try. This is my sandbox," and how often do you see that happen?
I think it takes the right type of person, right? So it sounds like, Jay, you're on the edge, right? Someone just needs to push you over a little bit.
I don't know. I'm probably kind of like you, right? I mean, I've thought about it in my head, but realistically, I probably never do it. But
yeah, and I think it's a lot of, right? There's a lot of you can talk yourself in and out of something anytime. I think the talking myself out of BCO, I'm never going to do that. Going in, I was like, I'm just going to do Gap. I can do a consulting project. That's easy. But then when I got here, there's a lot of, when you go through leadership foundations, when you go through meeting your cohort, when you hear about people say, well, why are you here? Why are you in this program? When you start hearing other people's answers of I want to try something new, or, I want to do something I've never done before, then you start questioning, well, what haven't I done before?
Right.
And for me, there was a pivotal turning point, my first quarter, when people are like, oh yeah, I'm going to do Gap. Or do you know what, capstone you're going to do? And people are researching and talking to all these people. But in the end, I'd say the reason people may do Gap versus BCO, the people who do Gap probably don't want to be entrepreneurs. Maybe they've never even thought about it, right? And maybe the Gap kind of curriculum of building a consulting project of what is that case, right, study, maybe that aligns more with their career, their trajectory of that promotion. But I think it takes a certain mindset when it comes to being an entrepreneur. And again, BCO, it's a team of 5 people, right? You could have 2 people who are really driven to be entrepreneurs and 3 people who are I kind of want to do it just to hang around with you to see what happens, I'm in the middle, I feel like. But I'm helping one of my friends lead this idea to BCO because I'm I think this might have legs, right? You go through and talk through your business idea with professors, with other students, and you're is there demand for this? Like, is there a market for this? And then you talk yourself into, oh, maybe we can build this idea out, build a business, and then sell it and make a lot of money, right? Like there's a lot of different paths. So
Right.
to your point, I think it is, I mean, you don't have to make a decision in your first year, right? You can talk to people, see what's up your alley. But I think one of the big things is regardless if you do GAP or BCO or any of the other capstones, there's ASAM, which is like an asset management fund. The only thing that really matters, and I think the biggest tip is make sure that those 5 people in your group that you want to hang out with regardless of what happens, right? Because you're going to spend so much time with them developing a business plan, like hashing out like, well, do you want to go this direction or this direction? What's the strategy? In the end, maybe your business is one of the 49% that doesn't get launched right after graduation. But you talk back and you're like, oh, remember that time when we tried to launch this and it didn't work? Well, why didn't it work? And in the end, it's really about you're spending so much time with this group. Make sure it's a group that you want to hang out with, regardless if you're doing a project together. Good learning experience.
Cool. Thank you.
Yeah.
Could I add a little bit on that also? Just so Jay, like in terms of percentages, I would say 10% of the student body wants to be an entrepreneur or is maybe wants to be an entrepreneur. And then maybe 30% want to enhance what they have, 30% want to switch to something new, and then 30% want to explore. So, I mean, these are totally rough categories, but I ran away from the camera for a second. This game, Mad Dragon. So this is a FEMBA student, it's a FEMBA alumni, it's an anger control card game for kids who have kind of like, you know, they get angry a lot. You pull these little cards and it helps you take your breath and calm down. So our one of our unicorns that we love to talk about, our $100 million FEMBA, was Brian Thomas. And he had done this before FEMBA. So he was in ed tech. He did like tutoring and such, and he saw a need for parents who had kids who had behavior modulation regulation challenge. So he had already gone through, but he was in ed tech and publishing, and so he had already successfully developed this. Then when he was in FEMBA, and this is I do the drive time interview with him, he had the idea for clutter, and they took logistics tech and revolutionized the self-storage and created a totally viable, better way to handle self-storage. So he was already an entrepreneur, used business creation option, got even better. His classmates told him his idea was dumb, but Professor Shinerock, who runs the business creation option and GAP, said, you know, I think you got a puncher's chance. And Brian, when I interviewed him, he said, that's all I needed. I just needed one person who had credibility to say, you got a maybe. And, you know, by the time he left Clutter, they were on their 3rd round of financing for over 100 million. So that's one example of already an entrepreneur, go for it. Then the other example is just kind of a funny, it's not funny, but there's Diego Benitez, who's another podcast. He's our guy who went from high school in Mexico to a PhD program at Caltech. So he skipped college and got a PhD in organic chemistry. And now he had already created a nanotech company. And then during FEMBA, he created a Progress Brewery in South El Monte. And he runs this really great brewery. And he chose to do the Global Access Program instead of BCO because he said, I already know how to start a company. Now I want to know how to run one. So, you know, people are in different headspaces. So I just kind of share all that. But, and I hope that, and then just to double down and underline what Wing suggested, that the beauty of the FEMBA curriculum is fall, winter, spring of year 1. You don't have to figure any of this out. You know, it's 2 core classes per quarter. Everybody's in lockstep for year 1. So you get, versus our full-time program where you kind of have to make a lot of big choices like your first quarter, FEMBA gives you a discovery on-ramp that, especially if you're curious, and just again to underline Wing, notice how curious she is about how she's moved around in her career, how she's seen stackable wins and really been able to build and build and build. And then within FEMBA, it's like, oh God, there's 50 clubs. I can't do them all. I'll do 3, but I'll stick with those 3 and I'll stair step up and introduce myself and take on more accountability. So I'm hoping that this kind of how-to Anderson, how-to career that we're, that just start to plant those seeds like, wow, there's going to be a lot to grok and digest and run against my own personal calculator of, do I even like that? Well, maybe I should just kick the tires to even see. So hopefully that, because we're not, Jay, we're not trying to sell you anymore. We just want you to accelerate your advancement by using these 6 months between now and August, like, to your advantage. So sorry, somebody's beeping me here. Okay, back to you, Wing.
For sure. And thank you for your answers. I hope I didn't interrupt your flow, Wing.
No. This was actually my last slide in my deck, so that was a great segue. Here's my QR codes to my LinkedIn. I feel like I'm connected with most of you anyway. But if you guys want to reach out to me or schedule some one-on-one time, feel free to hit me up on email. But I'll stop sharing my screen. And if anyone has any questions about anything at all, no dumb questions, or if anything that I didn't cover that you might be curious about.
So Wing, I got a question. I know we talked earlier this week, so thank you for taking the time to do that.
Of course.
So both, well, I guess the question I have, the slide where you were talking about how there's a lot of tools and opportunities at UCLA where you're looking at potentially career shifting or going through that recruiting process. You're a person who wants to stay with Disney. Were there any things that crossed your path in potentially other career paths or companies that caught your eye for a second that made you double think if you wanted to stay with Disney or not? Just curious how that went. Yeah.
No, that's a great question. I'd say yes. There's always, right? There's always like, is the grass greener on the other side? And I think that helps you kind of explore, right? Because there's a lot of people who've stayed at one company for a really long time, and that's all they know. And then when they talk to people about like, well, what's your company like? What's your career trajectory like? They're like, oh, that could be me. I could try that. For me, that's kind of why I opted into doing OCR. And so there's 2 rounds of OCR, right? There's OCR internships first year, OCR full-time second year. You don't have to pursue an internship. Like for me, I wasn't going to actively recruit, maybe. Like for me, that was like the I'm going to do gap. But I was like, I'm not going to actively recruit. But I want to do OCR because there's these events that I can go to, that I can meet people from like Nike or Amazon or wherever these other big companies that I may end up going to, just to make that connection, right? Just to learn from them, what is the architecture like? What's the hierarchies like? What are the teams like? So for me, it was just keeping the door open. And that's one of the things I did, that was making sure I was OCR eligible for both internships and full-time. But it then is, again, just exploring, right? So make that network. And I've always remembered this because someone said, the best time to look for a job or to talk to someone is when you're not looking for a job, right? And when you're in that mind space, your mindset, you're more curious than anything, right? You're more curious about what they're doing, how their business is run. And you even probably ask more intellectual questions than if you were looking for a job. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Yeah, great question.
And Mitchell, I'd underline that. Just our job is to put too much good stuff on the menu. Like that's why invest 6 figures and the time and the effort and the energy. Because, we are a universe, we are a university, and we attract a global talent pool of faculty and students who otherwise wouldn't have a chance to interact and overlap and connect. And so, like, I was a full-time student at the University of Chicago. I loved it. It was great. It opened doors. It was fantastic. Yeah. But 100% of my 550 classmates had a job they were willing to quit. It's one of those forks in the road that people don't think about, full-time, part-time. It's same faculty, same diploma. I guess it doesn't matter. No big deal. But FEMBAs have something that they worked hard to achieve. And, it's like, yeah, I want an MBA. I want the experience, education, the network. Yes. Check. But I worked hard to get here, right? And to have her on your left, if Wing's on your left and he's on your right, and then we all walk outside to get a coffee at the break, and what's up at Disney this week? What's up at Google this week? And everybody's got a job, except like Wing just said a few minutes ago, hey, I think we're gonna have an opening. Any of you guys know anybody? And then all of a sudden it was like, well, not really, but well, I get, the HR director loves me when I just bring her a maybe. Would you be a maybe for me? Well, yeah, but I'm not really looking. Just take a Zoom, right? And again, as Wing said, you're in the driver's seat at that point because you're happy, right? Like I don't want to waste your time, but I am curious because I respect Disney and all of a sudden, and now that HR director's got to woo you, you know. Well, Wing spoke so highly of you. Oh, well, thank you. I didn't know she said that. Yes, she actually did. And, and we want to develop people and we want to have a rotation and, we think Anderson and we've got a partnership and we got a track record and maybe could you consider and, oh, but I'm so happy here. Now, well, what would it take? What would it take? How am I going to get you into this car? Right? That's what executives master in having a positive upward spiral of a career. And FEMBA is a ridiculous accelerant to the confidence to hold your own on your side of that conversation and the connections to even be in the room with the right people to have the, so that's what I love about this moment. I'm in my 20th year here. I've watched thousands of people do this and I've done hundreds of these interviews and it's cool watching people just like, sometimes it's a lightning bolt. Those are great. But a lot of times it's just going to the gym consistently for 2.5 years. Right? You're gonna stand up straighter, your shoulders are bigger, your stomach is smaller. It's that disciplined approach. And it happens even while you're not looking somehow. I mean, Wing's not exactly an example because she was kind of a rock star before she got here, which is my job as an admissions dean to find people like her, to be your future classmates and your future network. But even mere mortals really stair step themselves up while they're here. And it's structurally embedded in the experience. The first year of the core, the transition to electives, you've had a year and a half to choose your global, your capstone, excuse me. You can sprinkle the magic powder of the global immersions on all of that. You can really customize. So by the time you get to the finish line, right? And the last thing, and I'll shut up, we're amazed at these 3 data points from the last year of salary 4 months after graduation, because we had never asked that before. Plus 49%, plus 55%, plus 62%. Those are ridiculous numbers. But none of us get a plus 49, plus 55, plus 62% raise with the same job title, doing the same stuff 3 years later, right? You got to kind of shake up the snow globe. And FEMBA shakes up the snow globe. Wing, 6 months into a new promotion, halfway through FEMBA. Also, as she comes to the finish line, if her upline is as intelligent as I know they are, they're going to be having conversations when she's not in the room going, well, what are we going to do for her? Because they understand she's going to have that brand new shiny MBA on her resume. And that leads to a whole other level of conversation of, I see my future at Disney. I just want to have a kind of a pathway conversation, right? And she's just requesting responsibly and respectfully, hey, let's make a next couple of step partnership possibility. No promises in corporate America. We all know that. But if it's a win-win outcome, it's a win-win outcome. So, all right, back to you, Wing. Sorry.
No, that's great. Any other questions? Yeah, Matt.
Hey, thanks for this presentation. Really informative. I was just curious how you felt with the FEMBA program in terms of managing workload. I think that's my biggest concern when comparing that to a full-time program, is just how you manage school and work at the same time and what your experience with that has been.
Yeah, very popular question. So for me, and even just look at my classmates, right? We've had people who've had kids, who've got married. Like I'm wedding planning and going to work and school same time. I think, or anybody going to the program, I think people don't realize how much they can fit into a 24-hour day. And I say that because time hasn't changed for me, but I've been able to wedding plan in every work, but do school, have group meetings, work on schoolwork, case studies, all of that, and still go to sleep at a reasonable time, right? Like I'm not doing all-nighters. And I think a lot of that is 2 things. One is being intentional about your time, right? Dylan talked about like, there's so much you can do, but it's, well, how will this add value for me, right? you can do everything, but then you're going to be burnt out. But it's being intentional about what programs, what clubs, what classes, who am I spending time with, who am I meeting, right? What is your goal? Some people come to MBA for, career promotions, right? Pivot their career, to start a business, to find an SO, right? Like we've had people who've gotten together in our class, and that, right, could be a goal. Being intentional with your time. 2, I think it's prioritizing. And I say that also because you could have a lot going on, right? You have family, you have friends, you have all this stuff, but prioritizing, that changes day to day, week to week, right? It could be work one day, 1 week. And one of the great things is a lot of people say like, oh, group projects at MBA, right? But the beauty of group projects, I'll talk about the flip side, is that everyone is also working, right? Everyone is also doing the same grind that you are. So everyone understands and everyone commiserates. You could be having a really hard work week, like so many projects, so many deliverables. Someone else in your group might be having a really chill week. So maybe they take more of that, work that week. And as you go through the quarter, right, that tables turn, people flip, responsibilities, time, bandwidth. That is part of the MBA and FEMBA experience, is being able to lean on, your classmates for that and prioritizing what you want to get out of the program, right? A lot of what you do is you're going to have to make choices. And if maybe you'll make a bad choice, maybe you'll make a good choice, but you'll learn from it. And so the FEMBA program will definitely test your time management skills. And the first year is really where you figure out what works, right? Everyone's doing the same core classes. Everyone's doing the same homeworks, doing all of this, and they're trying to balance what clubs to join. How do I do this with my work? What schedule works, right? As you pick out, okay, am I doing all Saturday classes? Am I doing Tuesday, Thursdays? You kind of fall into a new routine. I think change is probably what scares everyone. I'm like, can I fit this? Can I fit school in my schedule? The answer is you can. It's just how much effort you want to put into it.
Great, thanks.
Yeah, I believe in you, Matt.
Thanks, Tao-Ann. We're so glad you were here. Thanks for being one of our best attendees. We appreciate it. And Matt, I would just underline what Wing suggested, to say, like, everything about a working professional MBA is aimed at one thing, and that is increasing your effectiveness, right? And I like to think of FEMBA as, it's like a promotion you give yourself. And it's one of those stair-step promotions, right? There's a difference between a part-time job and your first full-time job. There's a difference between being an individual contributor and starting to manage people. There's a difference between being a manager and a director. All those stair steps that we go through in life, being single, having a significant other, having a life partner, those are all stair steps. And at one level, you're never really ready for the stair step. It's a learning by living and experimenting. If you're going to be a high accomplishment human being, which you are, nobody on this call is, this is not a call for potato chip eaters, right? This is a big thing that people choose to do. Graduate school is huge. An MBA is huge. An MBA graduate at UCLA, it's crazy. People who sign up for this kind of thing really want to expand their capacity. And the second half of your career, there's never enough of you to go around, right? You have a family, you want to spend time with your partner, you want to raise children who are not criminals, right? That takes a bunch of time. You have a big responsibility at work. You're the subject matter expert. You're the person who's the green light that makes things happen. That takes a lot of time. And you want to give back and be a citizen of our nation, and you want to have philanthropic outside. That takes a lot of time. So the second half of your career, everyone wants a piece of you. And as Wing said, if you say yes to everything, you've basically said no to everything and you burn out. So it's a crazy kind of maturity that each high-achieving executive, high-achieving parent, high-achieving human being has to figure out. And what I love about witnessing what I see FEMBA do for people, it just turns you into a ninja time management. And there's no way to learn. You can read Stephen Covey and you can do a weekend class, but some of this stuff you just have to live it to get your own personal calculus figured out. And I watch FEMBA, it's like cross training. It's not a light sweat. Oh, I think I worked out today. It's not that. It's a series of sprints embedded in a marathon. It is a lot, but what's on the other side of it is really transformational. You will be more intelligent, you'll be way more networked, and you will be confident at a level that is worth the investment. So, just as a way to kind of think, it's not, can I do this? Yes, you can. We graduate almost every single person. Everybody who completes the first quarter, 98% of them get to the finish line. So, we have a very supportive faculty. The staff knows you're working, but you got to bring it. You got to get out of bed Saturday morning or Thursday night. You got to stay up late like that. Well, we got,
Yeah, thank
maybe
you.
about 8 minutes. So maybe one or two more.
Go ahead, Jake.
I'll go again if there's nothing else. Thanks again for this session. This is really great. So less about Anderson and more about your career, because I found that very interesting. It seems like you've touched on quite a few different industries, which I think is really cool. And you mentioned maybe it wouldn't be entirely recognizable in your resume, but it's recognizable to you that there's a North Star somewhere in there, right?
Yep.
And I wonder, when did you know that North Star? Did you always know it, or did it kind of craft as you were going along? And what was your kind of mentality as you were kind of navigating these different roles at different industries?
Yeah, no, that's a really great question. I did not know that in the beginning. I don't think, well, if you do know that in the very beginning of your career, I applaud you, because then you really know what you're doing. It was definitely crafted together. I'd say that's part of building a brand, right? It's part of building your career. And I also think that the pivots, the transitions, right? The switches of, okay, what am I doing next? That help me understand, because that's when you're asking yourself the hard questions, right? That's when you're like, what am I prioritizing? What do I want next? What am I curious about? What do I want to learn next? And that's where I was answering those questions for myself, because I was like, well, what gets me up in the morning, right? Is it work? Honestly, it's not working in healthcare, right? I know that, but it's not working in a lot of different places. So you almost kind of deductive reasoning, process of elimination, right? Figure that out for yourself. And I don't think you can do that without moving around. You can maybe, right? But I feel like it's a little harder. Maybe it'll take you a little longer. But it is trying it for yourself, putting yourself in that position in different roles. Because to Matt's point, right? It's well, can I do it? Can I fit this in my schedule? You don't know until you try. I mentor a lot of undergraduate students, and I tell them this all the time, because they're going through internships. Internships are such a good way to figure out what you don't like and what you do like. Once you graduate, it's the same thing. You kind of start from scratch, because you have to build up your reputation again with all these new people, just like you did when you entered, undergrad. And it's, okay, how do I put myself in this position? Can I excel? Will I excel? But also, will I enjoy doing it? Because that's what's going to get you up in the morning. So for me, the pivots helped. The hard questions I asked myself of, what am I prioritizing? Is it culture? Is it the scope of work? Is it the responsibilities I have? Is it how much I'm making? And is it the career path, right? Do I want to stay in this role for 10 years, or do I want to be able to see where I can go next? So all of those little features and attributes, I think, contributed to me crafting a story of what can I tell myself, but also what can I tell others for them to understand my story.
Awesome. Thank you. As a fellow explorer, I really appreciate that answer.
Yeah, absolutely. Disney's really big on storytelling.
I would imagine, yes.
That is literally the first line in any Disney job description. We are
Exactly.
storytellers.
Yeah. And I feel I think that's part of what helped me get the job too, right? It's being able to articulate your story and why you made all these changes, why you made all these moves, but why it makes sense to now be here. Cool. Any other questions? All right, cool. Well, Dylan, I'd say for this group, if you guys want to reach out to me individually, we can always chat separately about anything you want to talk about. But I'll pass it back to you, Dylan, to wrap us up.
Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you, Wing, on behalf of everyone here today, plus the people who will get to see the recording in the future. And thanks for your service as in both FEMBA. It's so cool because FEMBAssadors, that's where we meet the future, and FEMBA Council is where we care for the present. And you're a leader in both, which is just to our benefit. So thank you, Wing, for being an example of servant leadership, and just keep the promotions coming. So I'll have more to keep bragging about for you.